as well as dealing with proportion for GCSE, we have to deal with inverse proportion as well, which is very, very similar. It's one massive clue with these kind of questions. Oops, sorry. And that is that the word is inverse is present. If the word inverse is there in a proportionality question, it means you're dealing with an inverse proportionality question, which should be given really. Again, they might say something like y is inversely proportional to x, or rarely but sometimes y varies inversely as x. And again, it doesn't have to be y or x, it could be any kind of letters, any variables, but there's a big clue in these questions. If it mentions inverse, then we have to do this question in the inverse way, so a slightly different way to what we do in the previous video where it was just proportionality. So let's have a look at that. Oops. Just fill that back in. Okay, so let's have a look at some, well, before we look at examples, let's look at how we set this up. So y varies inversely, or y is inversely proportional to, we still use a proportionality sign, but instead of just writing x here like we would do for proportion, if it's inverse proportion, we just do 1 over x instead. And that means when we set up our equation, we change the proportionality symbol, this thing, we don't want to solve with that in there, so we change that to an equals, and we multiply this side by k, so that means k times 1 is just going to sit on the top, so we just get k over x. Here we're again, here k is the constant of proportionality. And that's it, that's the only difference. So instead of being multiplying the right hand side by k and it being kx, we still multiply the right hand side by k, but because it's inverse proportion, we have 1 over x, so that becomes k over x in our question as well. So let's have a look at some examples underneath. So and again, I'll keep this really simple just so you can get used to the technique. So let's just use y and x. So y is inversely proportional to x. So pretty easy to identify these questions because they say that we're proportional, and if they say inverse, it's inverse. If they don't, then it's not. So y is inversely proportional to x. And again, they'll give you some boundary conditions. So when y equals 6, I'm going to give you x equals 2. Okay, and we're going to use the same kind of idea. So find a formula linking the variables x and y, or y and x, means they come in that order. Part B, find y when x equals 4, and then part C, find x when y equals 24. So part A, formula linking the variables y and x. So again, we need to translate our mathematical kind of sentence here into an equation so we can use it. So y is inversely proportional to x. So there's y, inversely proportional, proportionality sign, inverse means 1 over to x, so the x sits on the bottom, and then we just change that to an equals and write k over x. So multiply the right hand side by k. We can then use our boundary conditions, these conditions here, to find k, like we do with direct proportion. Sub it back in to get your equation linking the variables, and then you can use that to do parts B and part C. So here we're going to have y equals 6 when x equals 2, so we put 6 in for y and 2 in for x. Rearrange, so times both sides by 2, 6 2s are 12, so it gets k equals 12, and therefore my formula linking x and y, or y and x, is y equals k over x, but we know k is 12, so we can just put that in here, so we get y equals 12 over x. That's our formula linking the variables, and that is the formula that we're going to use from now on in this question. And then simply part B, when x equals 4, so we're using this equation y equals 12 over x when x equals 4, all we do is we put x in, we substitute x in, so we get 12 over 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3, so y will be 3. And part C, find x when y equals 24. So again, still using our equation, this one here still for both parts. Y equals 12 over x when y equals 24. We need to find x. Sorry about that, just got interrupted by my phone ringing. So when y is 24, we put 24 in here. So we get 24 equals 12 over x. Now, because it's a little bit more complicated with the x on the bottom, it's a little bit more complicated to solve, but hopefully we should be fine with this. So we're going to multiply both sides by x here. And that means we get 24 times x, 24x, and when we times the right hand side by by x, it just cancels the division. So we just get 12. And then we can rearrange this, divide by 24, so 12 divided by 24, and then if we simplify that, we get x equals a half. So hopefully you can see it's very similar to your direct proportion. It's just the setup is slightly different because we have inverse proportion, inverse mentioned in the question here, and that means when we set up our equation in the first place, instead of it just being x on the right hand side or whatever it is, it's 1 over whatever we have in the question, which means we get k over in this step. You're still finding the constant of proportionality k by subbing in your boundary conditions here, which will always get given in the question. Once you've found that k, stick it back into your formula, this one, and you get 12x, and then you're going to use this in the rest of the question and sub in your values and rearrange to get your answers. So I'll do one more example in this video, so number 2. So copy this down as you're going along. So this time we'll have y varies inversely as the square root of x. When x equals 49, y equals 1. Part A, find a formula linking x and y and x. Find y when x equals 4. And part C, find x when y, no, not when y equals 1, we used that before, didn't we? So I'll have when y equals 7. So part A. Again, read carefully, got the word inversely here, so this inverse proportion, and the varies as bit means the same thing. So y varies inversely, so proportionality sign 1 over because it's inverse. Read the question carefully to the square root of x. So on the bottom we'll have the square root of x. Be very careful with that, it's amazing how many people get it wrong. If it says the square of x, then that means x squared. But if it's got the word root in it, and only if it's got the word root in it, and then we get our root in there. Okay, so we're dealing with the second one there because we've got square root in the question. Change this to an equal sign, multiply the right by k, so k is just going to sit on the top. Y and the root x stay exactly the same. Get your conditions in here, so y equals 1 when x equals 49. So 1 goes in for y, 49 goes in for x. Square root of 49 is 7, so 1 equals k over 7, times both sides by 7, 1 times 7, 7, so k equals 7. Therefore our formula linking y and x, going to be using this step, so y equals k, which is 7, we've worked it out now, here it is, over root x. And that formula is the one we're going to use for the rest of the question. So part B. y equals 7 over root x. That's what we're now using. We found that constant of proportionality k. Find y when x equals 4. So when x equals 4, just sub in. So y equals 7 over square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2, so this is 7 over 2. If you want to, you can write y equals 3.5, y equals 3.5. If you know me, you'll know I quite like the improper fraction here, which is absolutely fine, fully simplified. So y is 3.5, y equals 7 over 2. And then part C, still using the same formula. Y equals 7 over root x. Find x when y equals 7. So when y equals 7, put 7 in place of y this time. Sorry, did that last time as well. So y equals 7. Again, a little bit trickier to solve, but should still be fine. Whatever's on the bottom, if the x is on the bottom, we multiply up by that. So we're going to we'll multiply both sides by the square root of x. That will cancel the bottom on the right hand side, and on the left hand side we'll get 7 multiplied by root x. Okay, again, just like writing 7x, but we're multiplying by root x, so we can just write root x. I don't like the 7 in front of this, they're multiplied together, so I'm going to divide by 7 to get rid of that. 7 divided by 7, I can just write 1. So we divide by 7 here, both sides. And then to get rid of the square root, the opposite of that is squaring both sides. So we square the left, we just get x, it cancels the square root, square 1, 1 times 1, we just end up with 1. And that's your inverse proportionality. So make sure you watch the proportionality videos, make sure you watch the inverse proportionality, very, very similar techniques. In the method, you write your formula down, you find your constant, get your formula, and then you use it in the second part and third part if there is one. Just remember with inverse, we have this 1 over, so k over, whereas in the proportion, we just get k times the right hand side.